G-Day and welcome back to SPX Podcast, the global chessboard. Over the past couple of years, the issue of Ukraine has dominated media outlets worldwide. While the final toll of this ongoing war hasn't been fully determined, the casualties are certainly not insignificant. The history of this nation has been just as tragic, if not more so, up until now. So, what is the story of Ukraine? Let's uncover the answer together in today's episode. First, let's go back to the early stages of history. It's no accident that both Russia and the United States have fought for control over Ukraine. It's also no surprise that people often joke that Ukraine is like a beautiful blonde girl, a metaphor for its coveted geographical location. In the early days of civilization, Ukraine was part of Scythia, a crucial area for the interaction between East and West. Archaeological findings show that people have been settled in what is now Ukraine for at least 4,500 years. Over thousands of years, throughout the Stone and Iron Ages. This land was ruled by various tribes such as the Scythians and Sarmatians. By around 200 BCE, the region was again overtaken by powers like the Scythian Kingdom, ancient Greece, ancient Rome, and the Eastern Roman Empire. In general, due to its special position, Ukraine has always been a target for the ancient empires who fought over the control of this land. It wasn't until the 9th century that Ukraine's role and position began to take clearer shape. At this time, the people in the region were primarily the Rus, and they went on to establish the Kievan Rus, a kingdom that spanned modern Ukraine, Belarus, and parts of Russia. In the following centuries, the country grew prosperous and became a significant power in Europe. Kiev was considered the mother city of all Russian cities in the 11th and 12th centuries, which is why many people consider Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus to share a common heritage. The language is similar, and cultural traditions are rooted in their shared past. By the 12th century, Russia began to diverge from Ukraine and formed its own state. Then, in the 13th century, the eastern portion of the kingdom was invaded and devastated by the Mongols, while the western parts, especially Galicia, were not harmed. However, by the 14th century, Ukraine's power was greatly diminished. The western part was then occupied by Poland, and the rest was attacked by various other powers. In 1667, the eastern part of Ukraine was ceded to Russia, and by 1793, the entire territory of Ukraine was absorbed into the Russian Empire. As the 19th century unfolded, wars erupted, redrawing the boundaries of Ukraine. Before World War I, Ukraine was split into three parts. Galicia and Bukovina were under the Austrian Empire, the Carpathian Ukraine was under Hungary, and the remaining areas belonged to Russia. In the regions controlled by Austria and Hungary, Ukrainians managed to maintain their identity, and independence movements were widespread. However, in the Russian-controlled areas, the Russian Empire implemented policies of assimilation to maintain control. This pattern of domination, particularly by Russia, is a recurring theme throughout Ukraine's history, influenced heavily by its strategic location between powerful empires. At the start of the 20th century, World War I broke out, with Ukraine divided. Much of it fell under Russian control, and as a result, it became caught between the warring alliances. According to reports, around 3.5 million Ukrainians served in the Russian army, while Austria-Hungary had only 250,000. Despite the efforts of these soldiers, both the Russian and Austrian empires were suspicious of their loyalties. The Ukrainians faced brutal repression, many executed or exiled to Siberia. Meanwhile, the Ukrainian soldiers in the Austro-Hungarian army played a pivotal role in the formation of the Galician army, which fought both the Russians and their own fellow Ukrainians serving in the Russian forces. Following Austria's defeat by Russia in 1914, Ukraine faced political instability. The struggle for Ukrainian independence took on a new momentum, and in 1917, the Russian Revolution provided a glimmer of hope. With the Russian Empire crumbling, Ukraine seized the opportunity to push for autonomy. However, the struggle continued, with various factions vying for power. In 1918, eastern Ukraine formed its own state with Russian support, while the western part of Ukraine aligned with Germany and Austria-Hungary. Despite the ongoing conflict, the desire for a unified Ukrainian state never waned. By 1920, the political landscape of Ukraine was in chaos. Despite the best efforts of Ukrainian leaders to maintain independence, Ukraine became a battleground for both the Polish and Soviet forces. Eventually, after much bloodshed, the Treaty of Riga in 1921 effectively split Ukraine into 4 regions, with most of it falling under Soviet control. Under Soviet rule, Ukraine became an industrial hub, though its people suffered tremendously due to forced collectivization and economic policies that caused widespread famine, most notably the Holodomor. Despite these hardships, Ukraine's economy showed signs of recovery by the end of the 1920s. However, by the 1930s, Stalin's policies and the rapid industrialization program led to further economic challenges and social unrest. Ukraine's industrial sector grew rapidly, but so did the wealth gap, leading to significant social tension. The working class, who benefited from the Industrial Revolution, trusted the Soviet regime, while the rural poor became increasingly disillusioned. This discontent culminated in the mass unrest of the late 1920s and early 1930s. World War II further devastated Ukraine, but it also provided a chance for Ukraine to reclaim its sovereignty. Following the defeat of Poland, Ukraine regained territories lost earlier. However, this time the country was caught between the conflicting interests of Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union. Despite the tragic consequences of the war, the collaboration between Soviet and Ukrainian forces ultimately led to a victorious outcome, with Ukraine playing a vital role in the defeat of Nazi Germany. However, after the war, despite the promises of unity, Ukraine's relationship with the Soviet Union remained strained. The political and economic challenges continued, and Ukraine was eventually engulfed in the turmoil of the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991. In the years following independence, Ukraine faced a long and painful struggle to stabilize its economy and establish a clear political path. The country's history has been marked by periods of war, occupation, and uncertainty, but its people continue to fight for a sovereign and stable future.